So for this video, I want you to follow along and pause the video so you can work along with me to make these 6 different textures. This is going to be a really good recap on how to mix secondary colors, tints and shades of colors, what the different brushes are for, and texture as well. Okay, to get set up for this lesson, this is just a practice. I gave you a bunch of newspaper in your paint kit. So you just need to take off one piece and spread it out. You'll want to open up your paints and take the tape off of them. And be careful that you're in a place where you have quite a bit of room. You'll need your sketchbook, the primary colors, which I gave you, and then white and black, which you also have, and a water cup. I like to use, if you're at home, I like to use like Gladware containers because they have a big base to them so they don't tip over. And then if you requested brushes, I gave you brushes. If you're using your own, you want a big flat brush, a small flat brush, and a round brush if you have them. But you can do any of these with whatever brushes you have available to you. The last thing you'll need is a mixing plate. So the first thing you're going to do is set up your sketchbook. I'm going to do this in Sharpie so that you can see it. I would recommend you do it in Sharpie too. You're going to split your sketchbook page in half vertically. And then you're going to make 3 columns. So just kind of guess about a third of the way down. So you have 6 total areas. And in each one, we're going to try a different Impressionist technique. This will also be a good recap on how to make the secondary colors and lighter and dark colors. I would also recommend having a little paper towel with you as well. So the first texture technique that I'm going to show you is using circles. I'm going to show you how to make a really cool circle design with your flat brush. And we're going to learn how to recap on how to make secondary colors as well with our primary colors. So take your kind of bigger flat brush and dry it off. And let's make an orange. So I'm going to take a scoop of yellow, clean my brush off so I don't mess up my paints, and a scoop of red. And I'm going to make a nice orange. And let's make a lighter and darker version of it. So I'm going to split it into 2. Add some white to one of them. Remember, this is called a tint. And add black to the other. And remember, when you're using black, you just need to use just the very, very tip of your brush. Okay, Impressionist painting is all about using multiple colors. So once you have your oranges, I'm going to dry my brush off. I'm going to coat my brush in one of my colors, and I'm going to set my brush down and twist it into a circle. So this is a really easy way to make circles. It might take a little bit of practice. I'm not going to clean my brush off. I'm going to dip into my darker orange. Basically, you just set it straight up and then twist it in a circle, and it'll make the circle pattern. Now, Impressionist is all about taking multiple colors and layering them. So because yellow and red make orange, I'm also going to use my yellow and my red and layer those on top as well. If you add a little bit of water into your paint, it'll become a little bit more transparent, which means it's just a little bit more see-through, and that might be a look that you like and you want to use. But notice I don't clean my brush off that much because red and yellow make orange, so it's okay if they kind of mix on my paintbrush. So by layering these circles on top of each other, I get a really interesting texture. So try it out. Practice lightening up one of your shades and making one darker. Okay, the second technique that we're going to do is making what I call a smooth blur. This works great for things like skies. We're going to use the same brush. We're going to use the big flat brush. And this time we're going to practice playing around with different shades of green. So let's go ahead and remind ourselves how to make a green. Yellow, and a scoop of blue. And this time I'm not going to make it lighter or darker. I'm just going to keep my green. Okay, to make a smooth blur, I'm going to use the side of my flat brush, just the face of it. I'm just going to start laying down one of my colors. And remember, Impressionism is all about layering multiple colors on top of each other. So without cleaning my brush, I'm going to dip into my yellow and my blue. And I want all of those colors to show up as part of this texture. You might even take your brush and use the side of it or the very tip of it. But as I'm dragging my brush across, notice how I'm going in one direction, I'm not going back and forth. It's creating this kind of textured, blurred look that looks a lot smoother than some of the other textures we're gonna do. I can also clean my brush off if I want to lighten up some areas and just take some white and mix in some white. And that kind of blends all those colors together as well. And you can make this as smooth or as textured as you want. The more brush strokes you add, the smoother it will look, but it'll always have that great impressionist technique of using many, many colors layered on top of each other. You just want to be careful that you're not layering every color because you're just going to end up with kind of muddy colors. So you want to be really careful what colors you choose. So because I started with green, the colors that I'm blending are the colors that make green. See? So that's how you would do kind of a smooth blurred look. Okay, next we're gonna do kind of a rougher texture. We've got kind of this circle texture, a smooth texture, and we're gonna do a rough texture. So I'm actually gonna use my smaller brush. You can also use the bigger flat brush as well. And now we're gonna practice making purple, just as a reminder. I'm gonna use my bigger brush to mix my color. So purple, just a reminder, is using equal amounts of red and blue. It's going to look very, very dark, but you'll notice when you do it yourself that it turns purple with equal amounts. And then I'm going to just make another version. I'm going to make a lighter purple as well. So I cleaned my brush off because I don't want to get my white paint dirty. And I make a light purple and a dark purple. So this rougher texture, you can use the bigger brush by just taking the very tip of it. It's almost like, think of like grass texture. I'm just going to make vertical dashes, and they can go in certain directions if I want them to. And I'm going to dip into my darker color and continue layering those. I'm going to dip into my blue too, because blue makes purple. So it's going to give it some depth and some shadow. I'm going to dip into my red as well. So I'm not going back and forth, I'm just using one stroke up, down to up. Depending on what kind of texture, you can stop and it'll be more rough. If you do too many layers, it'll become smooth like that. So if you want kind of a rough texture for like tree bark or grass, or sometimes even like rough seas, you can use this method. Using the smaller brush works too. It just won't cover as much area as the bigger brush. But if you're working in a smaller area, like if you're doing a tree and you need more detail, that smaller brush will get you into those smaller spaces. Okay, the next one's called stippling, and stippling's great for rough texture like clouds. It can also be good for, let's make different shades of blue for this. So I'm going to use my big flat brush. And I'm going to make, remember tertiary colors are kind of in between. So I'm going to make kind of like a blue-green color by adding a little bit of yellow into my blue. And I'm going to make a lighter version of that by adding white. And then remember what a tone is. A tone is when you add gray to a color. So I'm just going to add just the tiniest bit of black, and that will tone the color down a little bit. Okay, so stippling, you actually use the very tip of your brush like this. And you layer many, many, many layers of multiple colors that look good together. Like I'm doing different versions of blue. I might dip into my white. If you do this too much, it'll just smooth out. But you do want to kind of cover your area. So I'm just using the very tip of my brush. I don't want to ruin my brush by pressing down too hard. Kind of turn the brush, and the stippling blends the more layers you do. So if you want it to be really rough, you can add less layers. If you want it to be more smooth, you can add more layers. So I'm going back and forth between white and my different blues. And the trick is knowing when to stop when you get the texture that you want. So that is stippling, where you use the tip of your brush and you kind of stamp it down to get that texture. The next one is going to be kind of reminiscent of like Van Gogh, Starry Night, using swirls to create a texture. And this one's the first one we're going to actually use our rounded brush. And the rounded brush kind of tapers like a pen, so it's not flat, and it's great for things like swirls and lines. So let's make another orange. You can also dry your brush off on the newspaper. I'm going to make kind of a yellowy orange. Right, and I load my brush up, my round brush, and I'm just going to start making kind of swirl marks. Now, if you use the tip of your brush, you get thin lines, and as you push your brush down, you'll get thicker lines. That's what the round brush is good for. So I'm going to kind of fill this section with one color, and then I'm going to go and take some pure yellow and go around those swirls, adding another layer of color. And I'm going to take some red because red makes orange, and I'm going to swirl in some red until I'm happy with how it looks. So try not to hold your brush down here when you're doing a texture like this. You want to hold your brush a little bit back. And remember, you can always add in some white, and it'll blend things a little bit lighter, or some black to blend things darker. Just be really careful with the black because it tends to overpower colors. The other thing you can do is just take your brush and just use plain water too to kind of, especially with the black, to kind of dilute it. So a swirl texture is great for exaggerating things like wind or waves and water. Right, the last technique, we're going to do some dashes. And this is where you kind of print with the side of the brush. So we're going to try it with both the round brush and the big square brush. So let's experiment again with some green. Okay, I'm going to load my flat brush up, and then I'm just going to kind of print with the side of it. So I just use the side and I just kind of stamp it down like that. And what you do is you layer basically squares is what you're going to get with this, with the square brush on top of each other of the different colors. So if I used green, I'm using blue, since blue makes green. And you can almost get this kind of rectangle pattern. With your round brush, you can stamp with the round brush too. It's going to give you a different pattern. It's going to give you more of like a rectangle instead of a square. But you can take your yellow and your blue and kind of stamp the pattern on using the side of the brush.